Hello BookTube, I'm Jonathan, and today's video is dedicated to any book you've ever read, and then immediately type that book into Google, followed by the word explained. I want to discuss this topic of confusing books, and some different ways in which books can be confusing, as well as some reasons why they may or may not work well. Two common ways a book can be confusing are either a confusing world or a confusing story. I'm a science fiction reader, and a confusing world in sci-fi might be more common than it is in other genres. In sci-fi, we can have a far future timeline or an alien planet, and these can be very different from the world of our own. And an author can choose to explain all of these differences to us, and when it's done well, they'll be presented organically through the story. When it's done less subtly, this information will often be presented through exposition or info dumps. Every reader will have a different tolerance for info dumps. Personally, for me, I'm more forgiving of info dumps the more interesting that info dump happens to be. An example of this would be Neil Stephenson in his book Snow Crash. He provides a lot of technical and historical information for us to nerd out on. However, towards the end of the book, some plot points are revealed to us through exposition, and I perhaps might have preferred to see those play out through action. But an author can take a different approach. They can present the world to us in a slightly more mysterious or confusing way. They can either withhold information or present us information that we don't yet understand. In both scenarios, the reader is trying to put together a puzzle that will give us a better picture of the world. When the author chooses to withhold information, they're holding these pieces back until they're ready to give them to us. The alternative method is the author gives us all the pieces at the beginning of the book, but we don't know what we're looking at. This often comes in the form of jargon or technobabble, and we as the readers need to try and decipher the meaning of these words through context. Two examples of the withholding method are Christopher Priest's Inverted World and Brian Aldiss's Nonstop. Both of these books have a unique setting, and learning the qualities and histories of these worlds is a big part of the book's journeys. And a key to making this work is the reason for the characters withholding information from each other needs to be believable, as opposed to just an excuse for the author to withhold information from the readers in order to try and prolong their mystery. The great magic trick that an author hopes to pull off is the illusion of the story being real. And when you can feel the hand of the author in the book, the suspension of disbelief is broken. Now, I think there were some fantastic ideas in Inverted World, but when it came to this specific element of the writing craft, I thought it was more deftly pulled off by Aldis in Nonstop. Now, an example of the jargon method is the captivating and unsettling Vert by Jeff Noon. This book provides some vivid descriptions of the world, but it uses a lot of made-up terms. Now, some of these are explained eventually, but a lot of them you have to try and figure out through context. You group all the blue pieces together and just assume they're all part of the sky. Or the ocean, I'm not sure which, but part of the fun is getting to paint your own picture with the pieces. Moving on to our other category of confusing books, we have ones in which the story itself is confusing. I found two main ways in which this can happen. The first is that unraveling the plot is the primary goal for the reading experience set by the author. The book itself is a mystery, and every chapter is another clue. I think Philip K. Dick is the master of this style of storytelling, with my personal favorite book of his being Ubik. The second is that the story is confusing, but there are no answers to be found. There are no mysteries to be solved. The experience of being confused is the point, and devices used in order to help create this feeling often include an unreliable narrator or mind-altering substances. Examples of this style include Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer and Ice by Anna Kavan. These books often focus on creating an atmosphere or exploring a theme, as opposed to delivering a coherent narrative. Personally, I struggle more with the confusing stories than I do the confusing worlds. If you tell me that a child has been kidnapped and a father must go on a journey to find the digimolecule in order to fight the colosso hybrids to get his son back, I couldn't tell you what a digimolecule or a colosso hybrid is, but I get the essence of the story. The book has a direction. But when the book doesn't have a clear narrative focus, sometimes I feel like I'm underwater and I don't know which way is up. It can be cool to kind of hang out and explore the environment for a while, but vibes alone tend to only hold my interest for a certain amount of time before I feel like I need to come up for air. An example of the differences in these reading experiences for me would be The Quantum Thief by Hannu Ryanimi and Light by M. John Harrison. Both of these books are set in mind-boggling worlds with far-future quantum technology, and of the two, The Quantum Thief might have even more technobabble. I probably read the word gavulot 30 times before I finally figured out what a gavulot was. But as confusing as the world of The Quantum Thief is, we have a relatively simple story. We have a charismatic thief trying to pull off a heist, and a determined detective intent on catching him. Whereas the story in Light never really became clear to me. Even towards the end of the book, I was thinking, where is this going? Why do I care about any of these people? Did we really need all of these creepy sex scenes? Probably not, but I don't know. So, do I think confusing books are a good thing? Well, I think your experience will be determined by these 4 elements. Your personal preferences, your reading experience, just how confusing the book is, and its execution. You might enjoy trying to decipher technobabble, you might like exploring a mysterious vibe, and you might lean towards or away from one or the other. I also think how many of these types of books you've read before might inform your reading experience when trying to process similar books in the future. I certainly have not mastered the art of reading confusing books. I still get my brain absolutely fried by books like Accelerando by Charles Stross, but I do think there's a good chance that I might have gotten more out of them now than I would have if I had read them 5 or 10 years ago. There's also a scale for how confusing a book can be, and I think the more confusing the book is, the higher the level of difficulty for the author to be able to make it work. You can think of the different difficulty levels as either walking, hiking, or climbing. The more difficult the book is, the more assistance we need. For example, if you're hiking, you might just need some good shoes and some electrolytes. But if you're climbing, you're going to need some chalk, some ropes, and maybe even some other fellow readers helping you along the way. That is, unless you're the Alex Honnold of science fiction, just free soloing your way up the Book of the New Sun. So with that required assistance, the more confusing the book is, the greater the responsibility on the author to provide us just the right amount of puzzle pieces, or perfectly craft the atmosphere that the narrative requires. But as we all know from watching Olympic diving once every 4 years, the higher the difficulty, the greater the potential reward. There's something really satisfying about completing a tricky book, and if it clicks, it makes for a unique and memorable reading experience. So ultimately, while I do think it leads to some hits and misses, I do think it is worth attempting some confusing books for the potentially high heights. So there you go, those are some thoughts on some confusing books. Let me know in the comments some confusing books that have either worked or not worked for you. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, smash or just gently click the subscribe button, and if you really enjoyed it, consider checking out the perks of becoming a Patreon member, where you can become one of my robots, androids, or cyborgs, like Nima, A New Eden, Half Ogre, Zakawe, and the Confused Colin. And you can find more sci-fi content over here.